Hey there. Are you ready to dive into a world of vibrant colors and traditions that might just change how you think about life, death, and maybe even those delicious sugar skulls?
hmm
We're talking about Mexico's Day of the Dead, and trust me, it's a lot more than meets the eye.
It really is. You might be picturing skeletons and marigolds.
Right?
And yeah, those are definitely part of it. But what's fascinating is how deeply rooted this celebration is in ancient Mesoamerican cultures, going back over 3,000 years.
Wow.
The Aztecs and even civilizations before them didn't see death as an ending,
Okay.
but as a transition, a continuous flow between worlds.
Okay, so it's not about fear or mourning like some other traditions around death.
Not at all. Day of the Dead or Dia de los Muertos is about welcoming back the spirits of loved ones, celebrating their lives, and acknowledging that connection that continues even after they're physically gone.
That's beautiful. So how do they do that welcome spirits back?
Offerings. Imagine carefully arranged altars called ofrendas filled with food, drinks, photos of loved ones, and those iconic sugar skulls. And these aren't just random treats.
Yeah.
They each hold deep meaning, carefully chosen to nourish and guide the spirits on their journey home.
You know, I've always been curious about the ofrendas. It's like each one tells a story, right?
Absolutely. Think of it as a curated biography built with objects.
Okay.
Say if the person loved music, you might find their favorite instrument on the altar. Or if they were known for their baking, the aroma of fresh bread might fill the air, a sensory reminder of their passions in life.
Wow, that's incredible. So it's about honoring their memory in a way that truly reflects who they were. It makes those ofrendas feel so much more personal and powerful.
Exactly. And the amazing thing is this tradition of building ofrendas directly connects to those ancient rituals from thousands of years ago. It's a powerful reminder of how these beliefs have transcended time.
That's amazing. It's like a direct link from ancient rituals to the celebrations we see today. But speaking of history, our source material also mentions something called the impalement fields.
Right.
That sounds pretty intense, even for a deep dive on death.
Yeah.
What's the story there?
Yes, the impalement fields. That takes us to a darker chapter, a time of colonial struggle in Mexico.
Okay.
While Day of the Dead is about celebrating life and remembering loved ones, it's important to remember that history isn't always pretty.
Right.
To understand the impalement fields, we need to journey back to a period of immense political upheaval where brutal tactics were used to instill fear and maintain control. It's a stark contrast to the celebratory nature of Day of the Dead, but
Right.
these impalement fields, as the name suggests, were places where a particularly gruesome form of punishment was used
Okay.
during the colonial period.
Okay, we're talking colonial Mexico, a time of intense power struggle. So
Yeah.
I'm already bracing myself.
Yeah.
What exactly happened in these fields?
Imagine this, a vast stretch of land,
Okay.
probably somewhere in the Mexican countryside,
Right.
during a time when control was maintained through fear.
Wow.
Impalement was a brutal tactic
Yeah.
designed not just to kill,
Right.
but to create a spectacle of those who defied authority.
You know, for a celebration all about welcoming back spirits, this part of the deep dive has been pretty spooky so far.
Yeah.
Do people believe the impalement fields are haunted now?
It's interesting you should ask that because you see local legends
Yeah.
are full of eerie stories surrounding these fields.
Like what kinds of stories?
Well, people whisper about unsettling vibes, strange noises, almost like cries echoing in the night.
Wow.
And these experiences seem particularly amplified during Day of the Dead,
Right.
when the veil between the worlds is believed to be at its thinnest.
Wow, chills. It's like something out of a movie. But I bet there's a skeptical side to this too, right?
There always is. Skeptics tend to attribute these stories to things like superstition, overactive imaginations, and even the power of suggestion.
Okay.
If you go to a place expecting it to be haunted, especially during a time when people are already thinking about spirits, you might interpret ordinary things as spooky.
That makes sense. It's like our brains filling in the blanks with what we expect to find. But it's still interesting how these stories persist even today alongside the more celebratory aspects of Day of the Dead.
It speaks to how intertwined life and death are in Mexican culture. Even with these darker historical events, there's a sense that death isn't the end,
Right.
but a transition.
Oh, yeah.
And those spirits, even those who met tragic ends, still deserve to be acknowledged and remembered.
That's a really powerful way to look at it. It's like those stories, whether rooted in reality or belief, remind us that history has many layers and that death in all its forms is a part of that tapestry. But now I'm curious to get back to the beauty and celebration of Day of the Dead as it exists today. Can you paint me a picture of what the modern day celebration looks like?
Oh, it's a feast for the senses. Imagine vibrant orange marigolds everywhere, their scent filling the air, guiding the spirits home. You'd see homes, streets, and even cemeteries adorned with these flowers.
It's funny you mentioned cemeteries. In a lot of cultures, those are seen as somber places. But it sounds like on Day of the Dead, they're transformed into something else entirely.
Exactly. They become gathering places for families to remember and celebrate those who have passed. You'll find candles flickering on colorful ofrendas laden with food drinks, photos of loved ones, those beautiful sugar skulls, all there to welcome the spirits back.
I've always found it fascinating how sugar skulls, which could seem a bit macabre in other contexts, take on such a different meaning during Day of the Dead.
It's all about perspective, isn't it? The sugar skulls, often adorned with colorful icing, and the deceased's name really highlight that delicate balance between life and death. Joy and remembrance, that's at the heart of this celebration. They're not meant to be morbid, but rather a sweet reminder of life's preciousness.
It's like saying, yeah, death is a part of life, but let's focus on the sweetness of the memories, the vibrant legacy they leave behind. And speaking of legacies, I'm curious about how Day of the Dead is being received globally. It feels like it's become more mainstream even here in the US, with things like the movie Coco.
You're right, there's definitely a growing awareness and appreciation for Day of the Dead worldwide. Films like Coco have played a huge role in that, beautifully capturing the essence of the tradition and making it accessible to a global audience. We're also seeing Day of the Dead elements appearing in fashion art, music festivals, you name it.
Is that a good thing or a cause for concern? I could see how some people might worry about the commercialization or dilution of a tradition so deeply rooted in a specific cultural and spiritual context.
It's a valid concern, and it's important to approach these things with sensitivity and respect. But I also think that even if the initial engagement is superficial, it can spark curiosity and a desire to learn more. Maybe someone sees a Day of the Dead themed display and thinks, that's cool, what's the story there? And that spark of curiosity might lead them to discover the true meaning and significance of this beautiful tradition. Who knows, they might even be inspired to experience Day of the Dead firsthand someday.
That's a great point. It's like opening a door to a whole new world of understanding and appreciation. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Day of the Dead, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think it's important to remember that Day of the Dead is so much more than just a Mexican holiday or a visual spectacle. It's a profound testament to the enduring human connection to those we've lost, a vibrant celebration of life and death as interconnected parts of a continuous cycle.
Beautifully said. It's about remembering, celebrating, and cherishing those connections, even as life takes its different forms.
And with that in mind, I leave you with this thought. If you could build an ofrenda for someone you've lost, what would you include to represent their life and your memories of them?
That's a beautiful note to end on. It's a great reminder that Day of the Dead isn't just about one day, but about keeping those memories and connections alive all year round. Thanks for diving deep with us today. Until next time, keep exploring.
You know that feeling you get around Halloween? That spooky, mysterious vibe in the air, like something's different, you know? Like a veil thinning between worlds.
Yay. Yeah, I get that.
Well, get ready to really dive into that feeling because today we're exploring a tradition that takes that concept to a whole other level. China's Hungry Ghost Festival.
Oh, it's so much more than just spooky costumes and candy, that's for sure.
So much more. So to really get us in the mood, can you set the scene for us? What exactly is the Hungry Ghost Festival? What happens?
Okay, so picture this. It's the 15th day of the 7th lunar month.
Okay.
And this time is actually called Ghost Month.
Whoa!
Yeah, and during this month, the belief is that spirits, they're released from the afterlife. They can, walk among us.
Okay, so that already sounds way more intense than my usual Halloween plans.
Yeah, it's definitely got a different vibe. Instead of warding off spirits, like with Halloween, costumes and stuff, the Hungry Ghost Festival or Zhongguanji, it's about actively welcoming and appeasing spirits, especially these spirits called hungry ghosts.
Hungry Ghosts. Okay, first of all, that's a great name. Second of all, who are they? And what makes them so hungry?
Right, so hungry ghosts, they're believed to be the spirits of people who maybe they didn't get a proper burial or their families haven't really honored them in the afterlife.
Oh,
So they wander the earthly realm kind of longing for sustenance.
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe even seeking a little payback.
A little payback. Okay, now we're getting into it. So how do you appease a hungry ghost? Bake them a cake, leave out some milk and cookies.
Uh-huh. I wish it were that easy. Food offerings are actually a huge part of it, but there's a catch.
Oh, there's always a catch.
Right. You can't eat the food after it's been offered. It's considered like spiritually contaminated.
Wait, really? So you're saying you put out this big spread, the spirits, they do their thing, and then it's totally off limits, like nobody eats it.
Exactly. They believe that if you eat the food that the spirits have, been around,
Yeah.
it could mean bad luck for you.
Wow. Okay, so new rule for me. Don't touch the hungry ghost leftovers.
Right. Better safe than sorry.
Okay, so it's not just about, like, feeding these spirits. It's about respecting boundaries, right? Like, acknowledging that there's this whole other thing happening.
Yes. And it goes beyond food, too. There are other customs. Like, have you ever heard that you shouldn't answer if you hear your name called at night?
Oh, yeah. Especially during, like, scary stories and stuff.
Right. Well, it's a big thing during Ghost Month, especially near water.
Ooh, okay. Water. Why water?
So in a lot of cultures, water is seen as this kind of in-between space, like a bridge between worlds.
No, that makes sense.
It's where the veil is thin, and spirits can easily cross over.
So are these beliefs just like old stories and stuff, or do people still actually, believe in this today?
That's the thing. The Hungry Ghost Festival is so interesting because it's totally woven into so many people's lives even today. It's not just ancient history.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're telling me, like, it's not just these old stories, like, passed down, but people are still having experiences now that are, like, connected to all of this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we're not just talking about, like, vague feelings or anything.
Right.
We found stories, like real accounts of some pretty strange stuff happening.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so there was this one family, right? They'd always, like, really carefully done all the Hungry Ghost Festival rituals every year. But then, like, one year, they just kind of forgot.
Oops. And
Well, let's just say things got a little weird.
weird how?
Like, they started seeing lights flickering, things in their house would move around, like, on their own. Even their pets started acting really strange, like they could sense something was off.
See, it's always the pets. Like, they know something's up before we do.
Right. It's like this in a lot of cultures,
Yeah.
like animals are more in tune with that other side of things. But anyway, the thing about this family, what makes it so creepy, is that they weren't even really, like, looking for this kind of stuff.
Right.
They weren't really into the supernatural or anything.
That's always when it's the creepiest, right? When it's people who are, like, skeptical and then, bam, something happens.
Exactly. Like this other story we found about this fisherman.
Okay, what happened?
So he's out on the water, right, during Ghost Month. And he sees this figure come up from the water.
No way. You're kidding.
Yeah, and he described it, like, with so much detail, It obviously really freaked him out. And just like that family, he wasn't, trying to find a ghost or anything. It just kind of happened.
Man, that's wild. It makes you think, like, maybe those old ghost stories, they weren't just stories,
Yeah.
Maybe they were based on something real.
And it just goes to show the Hungry Ghost Festival is not just some, random holiday that people go through the motions of.
Right.
It's, like, really deeply rooted in this belief that what you do, it can affect the dead.
Yeah, it's like a reminder that there's so much we don't know,
Absolutely.
Like, there could be this whole other side to reality that we just don't always see.
And it makes you think, right, about how we deal with death in our own cultures.
Yeah.
Because this festival, it's about having this really active relationship with people who've died. Like recognizing they're still around in some way.
It's not just, like, mourning and remembering. It's like,
more than that.
yeah, like, we have this responsibility to them, to the people who came before us.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, wow, totally different ways of thinking about things, Like, I keep looking about Halloween, how it's all about, like, costumes and kind of keeping the scary stuff away. But the Hungry Ghost Festival, it's way, way deeper than that.
Yeah, definitely. It's more about, like, looking inward,
Yeah.
honoring your ancestors and like really accepting that death isn't the end.
Right.
It's just like moving into a different way of being.
And we have to respect that, right?
We have a responsibility to honor the people who've passed on. Yeah.
And this whole thing about balance keeps coming up, right? Like, we have to hold up our end of things, help make sure the spirits are chill, basically.
Yeah, totally. A core part of the Hungry Ghost Festival is that, like, if we ignore the people who came before us, it messes with that balance.
And then bad stuff happens.
Yeah, basically. Could lead to, like, bad luck, or it's just like a weird energy.
So we're all connected, you're saying. Like, it's not just about us, our own lives.
Right. It's like we're part of this bigger cycle, and what we do affects everything, even, like, backwards and forwards in time.
Whoa. Time travel.
Well, not exactly, but you get the idea, right?
Yeah.
We honor the people who came before us, and then hopefully people will do the same for us someday.
Yeah. Makes you think about what you want to leave behind,
Yeah,
And not just like money and stuff, but like what people remember about us.
exactly. It's like this whole other kind of legacy.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So after like really diving into all of this, the Hungry Ghost Festival, all the stories, what's like the main thing you take away from it all?
For me, it's just a good reminder that, like, every culture, we all have our own ways of understanding death, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
and like how to think about the stuff we just don't know. And the Hungry Ghost Festival, it's like
Yeah.
this really unique way to look at those big questions, those mysteries.
Totally. And it makes you think about like your own family, where you come from.
Yeah, your ancestors, your own beliefs.
It's like kind of beautiful in a way.
It is, yeah.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. But hey, listeners, maybe this will get you thinking about your own families, your own traditions.
Yeah, or just like take a minute to think about the people who aren't with us anymore.
Perfectly said. Thanks for coming on this deep dive with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening, thanks for exploring with us. Until next time, keep those questions coming.
Okay, so Guy Fawkes night. I bet you're picturing bonfires, maybe a few fireworks going off, right? And that V for Vendetta mask. It's practically become an icon.
Yeah, it's definitely gotten popular, but there's a whole lot more to it than just a bit of a bonfire party. We're talking about a story that's got everything. Religious tension, political plots that are, well, let's just say they were pretty ambitious.
They definitely didn't lack ambition, did they? I mean, trying to blow up Parliament
Yeah.
with the king inside, someone wasn't thinking straight. Or maybe they were a little too confident in their plan.
And to really understand it all, we've got to go back to 1605 in England. King James I is on the throne. Sounds nice, right? Except, well, the place is a tinderbox. And I'm not just talking about all the gunpowder, tensions between Catholics and Protestants. Let's just say they weren't exactly having tea parties together.
You're not kidding. Talk about a recipe for disaster. So let's talk about the gunpowder plot itself. I mean, who even thinks of that? What were they hoping to achieve?
Well, it's important to remember this wasn't just some random act of, let's blow things up. These guys were serious. They believed in what they were doing. And they were playing for keeps. We're talking 36 barrels of gunpowder here. It was a statement. This wasn't some little prank. This was a calculated power grab. And it was rooted in some very, very strong beliefs.
Wow, 36 barrels. That's a lot of gunpowder. It's like something out of a movie. Speaking of which, didn't an anonymous letter blow the whole thing wide open?
It did. And that's where things get really interesting.
Right. Was it really a betrayal? Did someone get cold feet? Or, and this is where it gets juicy, did the government maybe orchestrate the whole thing?
See, that's the thing about history, especially when you're dealing with power and politics. The truth, it's slippery. It's elusive. Was it a genuine tip-off or was it a setup all along? We might never know for sure.
Well, that's frustrating. But it also makes you think, doesn't it? It makes you realize that maybe not everything is as straightforward as it seems, right?
Exactly. It really makes you question everything. Because who benefits most from the plot being foiled? It makes you wonder. But anyway, back to 1605. So Fawkes gets caught. Obviously, the plot fails. You'd think that would be the end of it, right?
You'd think so. Case closed. But knowing this show, there's got to be more to the story.
Oh, there's definitely more to it. Because
Right.
November 5th, it didn't fade away. It became a celebration.
Wait, what? They threw a party to celebrate a failed bombing.
Not just any party. This became a full-on, we're in charge, don't mess with us kind of celebration. We're talking bonfires, burning Guy Fawkes in effigy, sometimes even the Pope.
Whoa, okay, that's intense. So it's less about celebrating they dodged a bullet and more about, what, using the whole thing to solidify their power.
Exactly. It's classic. You take a moment of fear, a near miss, and you turn it into a spectacle. It becomes a reminder. This is what happens to those who challenge the crown. Talk about a power move.
Wow, talk about turning the tables. But did it work, though? Did those celebrations really stop anyone from trying something similar again? Or did they just push that descent underground?
No, that's a really good question, and it's one that historians are still debating today. Did it really stop dissent, or did it just drive it underground? Did it truly create unity, or just the appearance of it?
So we were talking about this powder keg, right? All this religious tension, a plot that blows up in the plotters' faces, and a government that's, well, they're definitely using it to their advantage.
Absolutely. They seized the opportunity and they ran with it.
But here's where it gets kind of wild.
Ugh.
Fast forward a few centuries and things, well, they're not quite so intense, are they?
Not quite. I mean, today you think of bonfire night and you think fireworks, families, maybe some toffee apples, right? It's not exactly the image of religious strife and political upheaval.
Yeah, it's almost like cheerful. How did that happen?
It's actually a great example of how traditions evolve, even ones that start out rooted in, well, in violence, in oppression.
Mm-hmm.
They can completely transform. They lose that edge, that initial intensity.
It's like taking something kind of scary and making it fun.
That's a good way to put it. And, it probably comes from the societal need to process trauma, to make sense of these events.
So by turning it into a celebration.
Exactly. By celebrating it, you're taking back some of that control. You're moving past the fear. Think about it, the burning effigies, right? They were symbols of hatred, of fear. But over time, they become almost cartoonish.
You're right. It's like they've lost their power to intimidate.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean the past just disappears, right? There are still those echoes there.
Yeah, you can't erase history. There's still that underlying, I don't know, something a little bit darker.
Oh, definitely. I mean, even today, even with all the commercialization, those echoes of the past, they're still present.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, think about the burning effigies. Even if today it's mostly symbolic, you can't ignore the history, especially how it was used to target minorities.
That's a good point. It's a reminder that even traditions that seem harmless, they can have a much darker side. Especially when you think about how they were used to, to control people, to marginalize certain groups.
Absolutely. It's like holding up a mirror to society. You see the good, the bad, all of it.
It's making me think about Halloween, actually.
Oh, how so?
Well, you've got the fire, the idea of warding off evil. But with Guy Fawkes, it's got this extra layer, right? This whole political rebellion thing.
That's an interesting comparison. Halloween's a bit more about the supernatural, the unknown, wouldn't you say? Well, Guy Fawkes Night. It's about very human fears, the potential for violence, for oppression, the abuse of power.
It's true. And that reminds me, we have to talk about that mask.
The Guy Fawkes mask.
Yes. It's everywhere. It's gone from this symbol of a failed plot in, what was it, the 17th century?
1505.
Right, 1605. And now it's this global symbol of rebellion. Thanks, in no small part, to V for Vendetta.
Oh, absolutely. That movie, it definitely had an impact.
It's crazy how a symbol can take on a life of its own like that.
It really shows the power of symbols, how they evolve, how they're reinterpreted. And the mask itself, right, it's unsettling, but also kinda cool.
There's something about that grin. It's mischievous.
It's become synonymous with challenging authority, with fighting back. It's almost like Guy Fawkes himself, the actual person. He's
irrelevant.
been replaced by the symbol.
Exactly. It's fascinating, really. And it makes you think, why that symbol? Why has it resonated with so many people for so long?
It's that human desire for freedom, isn't it? For agency, for a voice, especially in the face of power.
You've got it. And it's not just the mask either. Bonfire Night itself, it's become a time for reflection. Even if people aren't thinking about 1605, even if they don't know the whole story.
Yeah, those fireworks, they make you think. They're not just pretty lights, are they? They're a reminder. Power is fleeting. And even in the darkest times, there's always that spark of hope.
Wow, that's a really good way to put it. It's like we're hardwired to find meaning, even in traditions that have, shifted, evolved over time.
Exactly. We crave that meaning. And those layers, those echoes of the past, that's what makes traditions like Bonfire Night so fascinating to explore.
So we've talked about how Bonfire Night has evolved from this tool of oppression to this more nuanced celebration. But how much of that original intent, that desire to control, is it still there, even subconsciously?
That's a fantastic question. And honestly, it's something that's still being debated. I mean, on the surface, it's just a fun holiday, but...
But there's always a but.
Right. But if you look closely, you can see hints of that old desire for social control.
Really? Like what? How?
Think about it. Bonfire Night, fireworks, bonfires. It's a controlled environment for what could be, let's say, disruptive behavior.
You're talking about like setting off fireworks in public.
For example, it's a way to let off steam, to be a little bit mischievous. But it's sanctioned, it's controlled.
It's like a pressure valve. Just enough to prevent.
A full-blown explosion, exactly. And on a subconscious level, that can be really effective. It maintains order.
It's incredible how these things work, isn't it?
It is. It just goes to show the more you dig into these traditions, the more you learn, and the more you realize how complex they really are.
So to be clear, are you saying that Bonfire Night is like some kind of tool of the government, even today?
Oh, I wouldn't go that far. It's not that simple. But it's important to remember that even seemingly harmless traditions, even fun ones, they can have these underlying dynamics. It's about looking at things critically, asking questions.
I like that. So for someone listening who might be say, a bit skeptical, what would you tell them?
I'd say think about the things we've talked about, the history, the symbolism, how it's evolved. And next time you see a bonfire, next time you hear those fireworks, don't just see the spectacle. Think about what it represents.
That's great advice. We've covered a lot of ground here. We've gone from gunpowder to V for vendetta.
From religious persecution to toffee apples. It's quite a journey.
But there's one thing we haven't really touched on. You mentioned how Bonfire Night was used to target minorities.
Right.
Can we talk about that a little more? What would it have been like back then to be, say, Catholic during Bonfire Night?
Imagine this. You're living in a society where your beliefs aren't just, disagreed with. They're demonized.
Oh, wow.
And every year you have to watch as they burn these effigies that represent, well, everything you believe in. It's a powerful message. And it would be terrifying.
It would be like living in a constant state of fear, knowing that at any moment things could
turn ugly. Exactly. And unfortunately, they often did. We have accounts of Catholic homes, businesses being targeted. It was a time of intense bigotry and this celebration. It was a very real reminder of what could happen if you didn't conform.
Wow. That's really heavy. It makes you wonder how much have things really changed?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Right.
We've made progress, of course. Tolerance, inclusion, all of that. But those prejudices, they still exist. Maybe not as openly, but they're there.
It's like this constant struggle.
Exactly. We're wrestling with these shadows of the past while trying to build a better future.
It's about acknowledging those darker impulses, right? They're a part of our history, even if we don't like to admit it.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to examine these traditions, to understand their full context, the good, the bad, and everything in between.
It's easy to get caught up in all the serious stuff, the history, the politics of it all, but we can't forget, at the end of the day, Guy Fawkes Night, it's a fun time. People love a good bonfire, some fireworks.
Oh, absolutely. There's something about those elements, those primal things, fire, explosions of light. It gets everyone going.
It's true. Gathering around a fire, telling stories, watching things explode. It's like it's in our DNA or something.
We've been doing it for centuries. And it speaks to something powerful, this idea of ritual. Even if we don't know the full story behind a tradition, just doing it year after year, it connects us to something bigger.
Okay, but imagine, back in the day, those early Bonfire Night celebrations, the processions, the torches.
And the effigies, don't forget those.
Right. It must have been quite the spectacle, like something out of Game of Thrones.
They were going for the drama, that's for sure. Remember, no TV, no internet back then, these big public events. That's how you get the message across.
It was all about who was in charge,
Right.
right? Look at us, we control the fireworks.
Basically, it was all carefully crafted to reinforce the social order. This is how it is. Don't even think about changing it. And by participating, even if you were scared, you were playing your part.
It's amazing how much power these traditions have. It's not just about having fun. It's about, well, control.
Culture, power, symbolism, they're all tangled up together. You can't separate them.
So where do you think Guy Fawkes Night goes from here? Another 400 years from now, what will people be celebrating? Will it even still be around?
That's the million-pound question, isn't it? Traditions are funny things. They can disappear overnight or they can stick around for centuries. Maybe it'll become a global thing. Who knows?
A global bonfire. Now that's an image.
Why not? It could be a celebration of, resilience, the power of the people, or maybe it'll stay a good excuse to eat too much candy and watch some fireworks.
Either way, I think it's safe to say Guy Fawkes and his little plot, they made their mark on the world.
They definitely did. And that's the beauty of history, isn't it? You never know what's going to resonate, what stories will be told and retold.
And on that note, I think we should probably wrap things up. We've covered a lot of ground.
We've gone from gunpowder to global icons.
Explored the dark side of celebrations, the power of a good mask. It's been quite the ride.
It has. But the best part is, it doesn't have to end here. If you're curious, do some digging of your own.
Exactly. Read up on the gunpowder plot. Watch V for Vendetta. Again, it's a classic. And next time you see fireworks, think about what they represent. You might be surprised by what you discover.
And on that note...
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Okay, so today we're diving into Obon.
Yeah, Obon. It's often called Japan's summer Halloween, right?
Right.
But that's kind of reductive, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit like calling a...
Like calling a symphony just a song.
It's definitely more nuanced than just spooky stories and paper lanterns.
So we're really here to uncover what makes Obon so unique and important to so many people.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
deeply rooted in Buddhist tradition
Okay.
and offers a really unique perspective, I think, on the relationship between the living and their ancestors.
Okay, so let's get into that a little bit.
Because we're not just talking about ghosts and ghouls here, right?
Like, really? No.
Like with Halloween.
It's more about honoring those.
Right, honoring those who came before us.
Yes.
Okay.
And understanding, like you said, why that's so essential in Japanese culture.
Okay, so it's more of a family reunion with a spiritual twist.
You could say that, yeah.
Yeah. So what does this reunion actually look like? Because our sources mention lanterns, special foods, dances. It seems like a very sensory experience.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
If you imagine, streets aglow with the soft light of chochin lanterns,
Oh, wow.
which guide the spirits home. And then households are filled with the aroma of traditional Obon delicacies.
Oh, okay, so they're really appealing to the senses.
It's all very intentional.
Wow.
And then you add in Bon Odori,
Yeah.
these captivating folk dances performed at temples and parks.
So it's a very communal event as well.
Very much so, connecting everyone through movement and shared heritage.
I'm really stuck on these lanterns.
They keep coming up.
Yeah.
Are they more than just decorations?
That's a great question because they really are kind of a symbol of Obon itself.
How so?
Well, they're visually stunning, for sure.
Right.
But they also represent this illuminated path between the physical world and the spiritual realm, guiding the ancestors back to their loved ones.
So it's like a journey, a homecoming,
Exactly.
not just like a spooky party.
No, not at all.
But I do have to ask, because some of the sources also mention ghost stories.
Associated with Obon,
Right.
does that mean that there is an element of fear?
Mixed in with all this reverence?
I see where you're coming from with that. And it's true that some Obon folklore can have eerie undertones.
Right.
But the emphasis really isn't on fear or fright.
Okay.
These stories often serve as more like cautionary tales.
I see.
Just reminding people to honor their ancestors
Okay.
and uphold family values.
So almost the opposite
In a way, yeah.
of Halloween,
You could say that, yeah.
where it's more about, like, being scared
Yeah.
and spooked.
Right.
So it's not really about getting spooked
No.
like you would on Halloween.
Right.
But what about those ghost stories?
Because our sources did mention some,
Yeah.
specifically this one, the Mujina.
Uh-huh.
What are those?
The Mujina.
Yeah.
Classic.
Are they scary?
Well, that's the thing.
Okay.
They're kind of more tricksters,
Okay.
masters of disguise,
Oh, interesting.
shape-shifting.
Shape shifting.
So they can, like, appear as different things.
Exactly. They can take on all these different forms, often appearing as humans or animals to try to,
To trick you.
to trick you, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Or to,
No, not necessarily evil.
not necessarily evil, no.
Just mischievous.
Right. Sometimes they're mischievous pranksters.
Okay.
But other times their appearances have deeper meanings, like they're urging caution or humility
Yeah.
or reminding people not to be deceived by appearances.
Oh, wow. So it's like,
It's like a lesson.
a
Yeah.
lesson, like a teaching tale almost.
So even the scary parts of Obon are more about, like, teaching something.
Exactly, yeah, and reflecting.
Point of life.
Yeah, like, don't just trust the surface.
Don't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, exactly. And they really embody that unpredictable nature of life.
That's so interesting how, because we did start this whole thing by comparing it to Halloween, but you can see how different cultures approach
Oh,
the
absolutely.
same themes in such different ways. Yeah.
Hugely
Or
different.
like death and,
Yes.
the afterlife and all that.
Yeah, it's universal.
It is universal.
But the approach is so different.
And that's what makes this so fascinating. I mean, obviously, Obon is deeply rooted in Japanese culture.
Of course.
But our sources mention there's a growing global interest in it.
Without a doubt, yeah.
Like, you see Obon celebrations popping up all over the world.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's that human desire for connection,
Okay.
with our past,
Right?
with something bigger than ourselves.
So it's both personal but also universal.
Exactly.
Look at
The
that.
idea of honoring those who came before us, remembering them, celebrating their lives, that resonates
It does.
across cultures.
It's true. It's true.
And, of course, the visual impact
Right.
of those lanterns. I mean,
the lantern.
it's beautiful, so.
It's interesting you say that because I do want to talk about this idea of cultural crossover because our sources mention something interesting. The influence of Halloween on how some people experience Obon,
Yeah.
particularly in urban areas.
Interesting, yeah.
So, like, how is that even possible? Halloween, Obon, totally different things.
Right about globalization.
Yeah,
Things are in contact more and more.
that's true.
Cultures are blending.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But do you think that's a bad thing?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand,
Yeah.
traditions evolve.
Right.
They adapt, right?
But then on the other hand, you don't want to lose the essence
Exactly.
of the original tradition.
That's the balance.
Right.
Because if it becomes too commercialized
Yeah.
or too influenced by other holidays, then it does lose that special thing.
It's like with anything, finding that balance
Right.
between preserving the heart of it,
Yes,
but also allowing it to grow.
that's it.
Yeah.
And I think with Obon, those core tenets, honoring ancestors, reflecting on life and death, strengthening family bonds,
Yeah.
those are so deeply ingrained in Japanese culture.
Yeah. Right.
That I don't think they'll disappear.
Okay, so it's more about like being aware of those influences.
Yeah, awareness.
Okay.
Being mindful.
And being respectful, I think,
Yeah.
of those traditions.
Okay, so as we kind of wrap up this section on Obon, it seems like there's a lot we can learn from this tradition.
Oh, tons.
Even if we don't celebrate it personally,
All right.
what are some of those things? What can we take away?
I think the importance of remembrance, first and foremost.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, just making time and space
Yeah.
for those who came before us.
Yeah, acknowledging them.
Thinking about their influence.
Yeah, because, I mean, we did start this whole thing by comparing it to Halloween.
Right.
But, thinking about it now, it seems like Obon is less about fear of the unknown
Right.
and more about this idea of celebrating the continuity between life and death,
Exactly.
which is a really different
Yeah.
perspective, I think, from
It is.
what we might be used to
Right.
in Western cultures. And it encourages us to view death not as this ending,
Yeah.
but as this transition.
Right, like a part of the natural.
Another cycle.
Yeah, the cycle of life.
Yeah, and that perspective can offer a sense of comfort,
Yeah, I can see that.
even in the face of loss, that connection.
Because it's almost like by remembering and honoring
Yes.
the people that have passed on.
You're acknowledging that they're still kind of with us
Yes.
in a way.
In a way, exactly, because they shaped our lives.
Yeah.
Their values influence ours,
Yeah.
and their love,
Yeah.
continues to connect us across time and space.
And that brings us back to the lanterns.
The lanterns, always.
What about them?
Well, this time I want you to think about them.
Okay.
Not just guiding spirits home, but illuminating that thin veil
Between the worlds.
between the worlds, right? That interconnectedness
Wow.
that Obon evokes.
It's powerful.
It is powerful.
So it's like it makes it real in a way.
It makes you feel it, right? Whether or not we subscribe to the specific beliefs of Obon, that sense of connection
Right.
to our past, to our loved ones, to something bigger.
Yeah. That's universal.
That's universal. And Obon just offers us this beautiful way to tap into it.
It does.
Yeah.
So I think as we wrap up,
This deep dive on Obon,
yeah,
it's clear that it's much more than just a summer Halloween, right?
so much more. Yeah.
It's a really beautiful,
Profound.
profound tradition with so much symbolism.
Yes.
And I think it can teach us a lot.
It can. It can teach us a lot about ourselves, really, if we
Yeah.
let it.
About ourselves, about life, about death, about remembrance, about family.
All of it. All of it.
So much.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me
That was my pleasure.
into Obon. It was fascinating.
I always love talking about it.
And to our listeners, we hope that this deep dive has maybe sparked your curiosity
Yes.
about Obon, about Japanese culture, about, how other people...
Celebrate and think about life and death.
Absolutely.
And we encourage you to, keep exploring,
Yes.
keep asking questions, keep learning.
Always be learning.
And, most importantly, find your own ways to honor those who came before you.
That's it.
And
Beautiful.
thanks for listening, everybody.